Great. So welcome back. Now we are all back in the main room, and I'm going to pass it over to Robert Cruz on the SMARSH team. He's our moderator, and we'll kick off our thought leadership portion of the program.
Terrific. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate your time. Again, the topic here I think is immediate and now for everyone. So the notion of, you're suddenly remote workforce and the risks and challenges that firms are now wrestling with just to make sure that people are using these technologies the right way. You're not creating exposures for the organization. So, for some companies, and we heard it in our little breakout room, this is incremental change. Some people are accustomed to working from home, and we're talking a lot of firms now that this is brand new. This is an entirely new proposition. So, a lot of questions about how to begin. What are some of the things you should think about in terms of, enabling your employees to be productive at the same time, making sure you have the appropriate guardrails. So let me just kind of walk into what the topics will be in our next half hour of discussion, and then have the panel kind of provide some introduction while my dog barks in the background. So we're going to talk about the disruption in communications and collaboration, and kind of how this is, it's been a trend that's now accelerated. And so we'll kind of talk about some of the drivers behind that. I think the central part of the discussion here really is going to be around bullets 2 and 3. What are the risks? What are the things that companies should be taking into consideration? And given that, what can they do? What is the solution in terms of process and technology and training for your employees? And we'll kind of leave folks with hopefully a couple of insights, things that you should walk away with in order for your firm to be more proactive if this situation can persist. How can you make sure that you're managing all of the implications for working from home? So let me introduce my panel first of all, and if we've got Caitlin, can you thanks for joining, first of all, and if you could give us a little background on where you are in this discussion, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And let me just do a sense check. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Caitlin Klein. I'm the Deputy Global Chief Privacy Officer at Aon. I'm happy to be here and participate on this panel today. As a privacy professional, of course, I'm approaching this issue with privacy top of mind. And so I'll be talking a little bit later about some of the key issues and risks to consider, especially if you're trying to document some kind of privacy impact assessment related to the use of these kinds of communications and collaborative technologies. So I'm happy to be here.
Terrific. Thanks for joining. How about Garrett?
All right, so good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, actually. My name is Garrett Williams. I'm Chief Compliance Officer for CNA Insurance here in Chicago. I think about it a couple of different ways. How do we encourage collaboration among my team? How do we encourage collaboration with our business partners? And how do we collaborate effectively with our customers? CNA is a little bit more of an old school organization when it comes to technology, so we've got a lot of requests right now. Can we try this new technology or this new collaboration tool to best reach out internally, to best reach out externally? And that presents all sorts of questions in terms of how best to facilitate that. How much rigor do you apply as you do due diligence in advance? And to what extent are you hindering the business from advancing by doing the due diligence? So it's a balancing act right now, trying to facilitate business while maintaining privacy, as Caitlin mentioned, and ensuring compliance. It's a fascinating topic, changing times. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Terrific. The balancing act, definitely a part of our discussion here. And we have Paul.
Hi there. Sorry to get off mute. This is Paul Brown. I'm Deputy General Counsel at UL. We're the product certification company. Everyone probably knows that little UL in a circle that you see on products all over your house. Yeah, so for us, part of our workforce can't work from home, at least not easily, right? We have testing labs all over the country, all over the world, really. So, the kind of work, especially the corporate functions that we're able to do from home, is really important right now during this crisis. And there is actually some more of our evaluation work that we're able to do at home. And it's very interestingly, we've recently put in place processes and procedures by which our engineers with clients' request and permission are able to take home product samples and do limited amounts of work on them. So that introduces a whole different set of confidentiality and IP concerns that we're dealing with and collaborating with our clients and our partners with to run those issues down. So it's been very interesting. Within my gamut, I've got litigation, privacy, information security, commercial contracts, and IP. So thinking about how all those areas are affected by the increased use of, we use Skype and Teams, and then, we'll have third parties who want to use things like Zoom, like this, for example. So very happy to be here.
Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. And,
Sure.
The panel, I think, overall introduced a variety of things that we're going to get into here: privacy, security, regulatory, as well as litigation risks. So all considerations that we're going to jump into. But, I think a place to start is what we often see as, this is really a dynamic that's happening regardless of the whole remote from work scenario. And so when we talk to companies about how communications have changed, it really is described, I think, very well in this chart. Just the fact that, it's about each generation of employee and client having their own preferences, their own tools that they're comfortable with. Your clients want to engage you with technology that they're familiar with, they've grown up with. And so what we were seeing even before this was the notion that the need for immediacy. I want to be able to send a message and have a response. And so the growth of chat applications and other mobile messaging applications. And we probably, many of us know this from, trying to interact with our children who probably have never responded to an email. I could send an email to one of my kids and I'll never get a response, but I've sent a text message, I'll get it in like 10 seconds. So the reasons these things are happening or we're already down this path is because just the ways that companies are communicating have changed, and organizations frankly have seen the benefits. They've seen the ROI from the collaboration tools. They've seen how the reduction in the use of email is benefiting them in terms of responsiveness and agility and ability to take on business changes more smoothly within the organization. And just the thing to note here, as setting of context, if you've seen some of the stats from the past 3 weeks, Microsoft indicated that their cloud usage has gone up 800%, which is probably attributing to some of my internet funkiness today inside of this meeting, but 800% growth in the use of their cloud technologies and bandwidth. Zoom has seen an increase of 340% in their daily average users over the last 3 weeks. And Slack, I think, is up 37% month over month in terms of the volume of usage on their platforms. So, all of those things, we can expect. I mean, these are the technologies that we're putting in front of our employees to get their work done. At the same time, you're also seeing WhatsApp and WeChat growing 45 to 50%. The ephemeral applications, the downloading of messaging tools that may not meet your compliance requirements. So we see a lot of companies that are struggling, but both in terms of enabling your folks with the right tools, but also making sure that you're not enabling the use of technologies that your firm is not able to capture. So I don't know if anyone on the panel might have some commentary or thoughts regarding Teams and Slack and Zoom and other collaborations. What have you seen the benefit to be to this point in the use of these technologies? Any anecdotes from the panel to share here?
Yeah, hey Robert, this is Caitlin. I'd be happy to start, and then maybe Paul and Garrett can come in after. I think one of the big benefits we've seen in the way that these collaboration and communication tools are changing is the ability to make decisions quickly, right? So it used to be in trading emails and kind of going back and forth, that there was a time lag there. And now with some of the collaboration tools, it really enables businesses to be agile, to make some real-time decisions and to not have to wait, right, with some of that time lag to get to a point where you're comfortable making a decision or where you have all the necessary information to make a decision. There is a flip side to that, of course, which is sometimes the fast decision isn't the right decision. And so I think what we try to emphasize, and what I think is really important when using these types of collaboration and communication technologies, is to feel comfortable taking a step back, saying you need to take something away, you need to think it over, you need to perhaps discuss with some other people or do some research, and give yourself that kind of quiet moment to really think through the issue, and not get caught up in that fast-paced pinging back and forth or video chatting back and forth, to make sure that you're landing on the right decision on an issue.
Exactly. The interrupt-driven dynamic is something I'm struggling with big time, because my phone, while we're talking, is ping, 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 ping. So it's really hard to partition off those two things. Garrett, what are your thoughts? Any benefits that you've seen so far in the use of these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, Caitlin, the agility is a big thing, and we've seen that over the course of the last couple of years as collaboration tools have become more prevalent. But what I've seen really over the course of the last couple of weeks has been flexibility. So CNA is mostly a commercial insurer dealing with larger business clients, but we do have a significant presence in the long-term care space. And the long-term care customers that we're dealing with largely are older. It's been very interesting as our team has worked with those individuals and tried to replace the in-person interactions that have historically occurred with some sort of some other interaction through collaboration tools. Our customers, some are comfortable with Zoom, some are comfortable with Skype, others are comfortable with Google Duo, and our team's trying to be flexible to enable those communications to be as simple and as convenient for our customers as possible. So that flexibility has been really important. That just puts on us a little bit of a challenge from a compliance, from an oversight perspective, from a privacy perspective, because you're working with and juggling with multiple different tools, customer driven, and trying to make sure that they all meet the needs of the organization.
Exactly. The flexibility is key. Paul, how about you? Have you seen some of those end benefits from your organization as well? Has that happened yet?
Yeah, certainly I agree. The flexibility and agility is a big advantage so far. My company is very heavy on the meetings in general, a lot of in-person meetings, so I've been happy that those have obviously been cut down. And I'm hopeful that even after this is all done and we're back to work, we will have less in-person meetings. I find it's easier to set up these Skype or Teams meetings and get things done quicker without having these long, drawn-out, hour-long in-person meetings. I don't know if anyone else suffers from that, but this has been a nice change from that.
I think it's a great point. I think after all this is done, there will be some that prefer this method of communicating, and the virtual work situation just will feel comfortable. And so I think it's going to cause an adjustment for some companies to just stay in this mode of having remote as well as physically located individuals. So yeah, it's probably just accelerating the trend that we were on anyway. So let's get to the risk part of this discussion, because I think the benefit piece, again, the adoption is showing that. But the risk parts, I think, are worth exploring. And I'll just start with one that you may have seen the term appear in the last few days, called Zoom bombing. So this is the idea through Zoom that unless you set the appropriate controls, an individual can just randomly show up in a meeting, and once they show up, people can do interesting things. And I guess if you don't set the settings properly, then you can create exposure. There's people that may end up in a discussion that don't belong there. When you look at this discussion and think about, well, what are the regulatory obligations? What if we were discussing something that pertains to our delivery of a product that is regulated? Would this conversation be something that would be requiring retention, and a books and records treatment? When you look at some of these conversations happening in Teams and Slack, in many cases, these are persistent chats. Microsoft can support thousands of individuals involved in a persistent chat. How do you review that? So why don't we look at the risks and start with, a lot of folks here are focused on privacy. Why don't we talk first about the privacy implications here? In particular, collaboration and mobile. It's very comfortable to just pick up your device and chat. So help me kind of get a sense of the privacy implications that arise in your minds here. Caitlin, you want to start us with that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Robert. And I think the baseline here that I'd like to set is for any size organization, I always recommend that you have some kind of documented privacy impact assessment. Not necessarily, a full-blown GDPR style DPIA, but there are some things really that I think it's important to think about and to document your considerations with respect to some of the privacy risks. So let me just kind of, off the top of my head, run down, some of the major considerations I think that you have to take when you're using these collaboration and communication technologies. First would be the type and the volume of personal data that you expect to be flying around on the communication platform. So that would be things like, are we talking about special categories of data, particularly sensitive data like health data or financial data? A second consideration there is there large-scale processing that's going to be taking place? So if it's a significant number of data subjects whose data will be shared on the platform, to really take that into account when you're assessing the risk and then determining what your mitigation strategy is going to be. Certainly, anytime we talk about privacy, we're thinking about data subject rights. Making sure that individuals are able to exercise those rights and planning in advance for how we're going to respond if someone does make that kind of data subject request. I think this next one has been in the news a lot, which is understanding the secondary uses of information, right? When you're choosing your platform or assessing your platform, what secondary uses of information are permitted or allowed, and how can you restrict that if you need to, if it's a regulatory issue. Certainly also in the privacy space, thinking about issues of data retention, data disposal. Do you have a good grasp for the platform of how that's going to occur and whether you can control it? And then last, making sure that you've got some kind of evidence, appropriate supplier due diligence, platform provider, knowing that you've done your homework, that you've got an adequate data agreement, data use agreement in place, and being able to produce it is going to be important. So again, these are just kind of some high-level issues, but really what I think is important is to document these issues, and then to think about for each of them in the second column, what's your risk mitigation strategy for each of these issues that you face? And that'll, I think, really heavily depend on the facts, what kind of data we're talking about, what volume of data we're talking about, and what industry your company is in.
Some great points there. I want to come back to a couple of them in the next slide here, just in terms of how do you separate the business from personal use of these tools, and then also some of the secondary use. I mean, in fact, just yesterday, Zoom disabled the ability to launch a Zoom meeting from Facebook because Facebook apparently was taking some of the data gathered within Zoom and using that for monetization. So very important considerations. So Garrett and Paul, I guess both from looking at this from a litigation perspective or from a discovery perspective, you now get questions like, well, how am I going to be able to capture a historical record from a tool like Slack? I mean, what do you think are some of the key litigation and discovery concerns that might arise through this kind of proliferation of all these new unique tools?
Yeah, this is Paul. So we use Skype and Teams, and we have them set up so that they do retain conversations. And we have those aligned with our data retention and destruction policies. So that's important for everyone to think about. What are the automatic collection and preservation capabilities of those tools, and how do they align with your policies? Make sure that they do. I think with, many conversations, we want to avoid discussing sensitive information, attorney-client privilege communications, unless obviously that's the purpose of the meeting. Avoid creating a paper trail of privileged materials if you can. If it's absolutely necessary to have, conversations within these tools that are going to be documented, make sure they're marked. I know it sounds kind of silly, but label them attorney-client privileged. And you've got to figure out how you're going to review these materials. And, we talked about preservation and making sure, obviously, that's all aligned with what you would need to do from an e-discovery standpoint. And then access controls are important as well. So you don't want non-authorized individuals being able to access the conversations after the fact. So, this has to be a collaboration between you and your IT group, probably, depending on who's managing those subscriptions and the settings for e-discovery and retention and preservation.
That collaboration is critical. We'll talk to that in a second. Garrett, any additional thoughts on the discovery risk or other risks? I mean, we haven't talked InfoSec, but that's another one. Clearly, there's a whole bunch of new InfoSec exposures that potentially are introduced here. So what additional things would you have folks consider?
Robert, I guess from my perspective, what's important is nothing that Caitlin said, nothing that Paul said is anything new, right? We're dealing with all of these things already. What's new is we're dealing with them in a new and a different way. So you need to understand who your partner is and what they're going to do, so understand their privacy policy. And then it's really about sensitizing your teams, whether it's the oversight teams or it's the folks who are using the tool to the things that are different about this tool. In a lot of cases, what you're finding is the collaboration tool is replacing one-on-one communication that hasn't face-to-face communication that hasn't typically been captured in any way, shape, or form. And quite frankly, some of the candor that may occur in a face-to-face conversation, you probably don't want to capture on a record in a collaboration type of conversation. But we've been dealing with that over the last several years as IM and text messaging gets more prevalent for business purposes. So it's really about sensitizing the people and helping them realize that the environment that they're operating in is different. Just an example, I mean, we're all working from home. Many of us have significant others. We have kids, maybe roommates who are on our same premises. And there are concerns, right, with having those people overhearing your conversation, with the confidentiality. You're not in the context of your own office environment where everybody is with your firm or your business. And so there's got to be some discretion utilized, and we don't always think about that in the context of these conversations.
Great advice and guidance there. And I think what your comments also point to is guidance we've seen from the regulators that have said, make sure as you make this transition that your supervisory processes, that your oversight has the ability to reach into these remote work environments, that your policy is not written to deal exclusively with individuals that you can see, on the next floor or down the hall. So, this really gets now to the best practice aspect of this. And, the governance component here can mean a lot of different things. And I think the panel, you've mentioned several of them in terms of the partnership between compliance, legal, and IT to make sure that you're doing a full assessment of the risks before you allow individuals to use these tools. We have big banks as clients, and they're supporting today 80 to 90 different communication sources because that's where their clients are pulling them. But they'll all tell you that there's a very good chance there's other unauthorized networks out there as well, and they're looking to find ways to be able to govern or at least inspect what those other sources are. So talk to us about some best practices, what companies can do collaboratively across the organization to make sure that you're in front of some of these risks.
So I think the first thing is training, right? The first and most basic thing always is it comes down to the behavior of your workforce and making sure that you're presenting some of these considerations in a way that isn't maybe capital C compliance, but really brings it home to people and makes it real to them. One of the best practices that we always try to keep in our training is using real world examples, using storytelling as a tool, and making sure that we drive the message home in a creative way that makes it about the employee, that makes it about your day-to-day work, so you can realize the importance of taking the right actions as you go through. Paul and Garrett, what do you think?
Yeah, so some additional thoughts. And some of these are, I think, a little more tactical. So hardware, for one thing. I've heard stories about employees working at home using their own machines versus the work-provided machine. From a security standpoint, you want your employees using your hardware with your, for example, antivirus software on there, your security protocols. So making it easy for them, perhaps they had to leave the office, or they didn't have a chance to grab their computer before the stay-at-home order, whatever it is, find a way to get them a work machine that has the protections you want on it. Also, give them platforms that are secure from the work perspective, right? So we use Skype, we use Teams, we don't use Zoom. No offense to Zoom, I've heard some concerns about security for it. I'm sure there are none for this seminar. But our IT group, well before this, had vetted Teams and Skype from a security standpoint and are comfortable with the controls and how that is all enabled. So I guess the overarching point is make it easy for your staff to do this in a way that is compliant with the company's security posture. Just give them the tools, give them the way to do it. And, again, it may be a little more expensive now if you've got a bunch of employees at home without the right machines or tools, get it to them as best you can.
Yeah, Paul, from a compliance perspective and from an audit perspective, I've been partnering with our chief audit executive to think about how do we monitor the use of these new technologies or the increased use of technologies that we were already looking at. Making sure that you have insight into what's going on these tools, making sure that you've got flags popping when something's occurring that isn't aligned to your expectations, that isn't consistent with your policies. Just thinking differently about what controls you have in place and how they apply to these new technologies has really been something that's taken a lot of effort on our part, my team's part, and on the audit team's part at CNA. But when you think about the investment that we're making in our people and the investment that we're making in empowering them to work from home, we're trying to facilitate that. We're not trying to prevent it, but you still have to have that insight into what's going on.
That's a great suggestion, and it kind of ties back to Caitlin's point earlier about small c, not necessarily the regulatory issues, but just what are people doing on these technologies? And, if you get at the question of compliance and ethics or code of conduct, how are you ensuring that you're not violating policies, you're not leaking intellectual property, you're not providing the appropriate controls over your information under non-disclosure. So, that question of how do you determine what people are doing, I think is a very important one, just to make sure that, individuals know what the guardrails are. I want to finish with that one because I think that's a very important point is how do you guide your employees and how do you provide the appropriate guardrails? And I think, Caitlin, you said the storytelling as part of the training. I think it's a great concept because it needs to be specific to what individuals are actually doing with each of these tools. But, at the end of the day, I'm somebody that's never worked from home before. Suddenly, I'm asked to continue to deliver and do my job and get results. But, what can you do to guide this individual who doesn't have the experience or the background to know, what he can and cannot do as part of this remote situation? So how do we address the training issue here?
Just all computer-based training modules, really boring ones.
Yeah.
You know what? When all of this started, just anecdotally, one of the things that we did on my team was to publish a checklist that went out in a blast to all employees. That was very simple, very action-based, but we partnered together with the security team and the compliance team to create a simplified checklist of reminders around privacy and security when you're working from home. Things like making sure you continue to lock your computer when you get up, just because it's a good practice. To things like making sure if you're working in a public space that you have a privacy screen across your laptop, as well as some issues related to printing from home, right? And some considerations with how you should be securely destroying documents, or maybe even waiting until you can bring them back to the office and have them securely destroyed back in the office. So we tried to keep it really simple, but splash it up to all employees, make it really action-oriented and straightforward.
Those are great examples,
What about
Caitlin.
others?
At CNA, it's relentless repetition of message, right? It's about making sure that those messages are through all different sources. So the CEO's in his message has shared some of the concerns or some of the things that you need to keep in mind when you're working remotely. We've got a website that's dedicated to it with tips, work from home tips. We've got message points for all of our managers to talk through in their daily huddles or in their team meetings. So it's relentless repetition of message because, Robert, as you mentioned, a lot of folks aren't used to working from home. They aren't thinking about the differences, and we need to make sure that we keep them sort of apprised of those concerns, those differences, and keep them in front at the front of mind.
Paul, anything to tie off on that subject of equipping the individuals with the right guidance and guardrails to know what to do and what not to do?
Yeah, I agree with what the other two speakers said. I would add to that, hackers are going to act very opportunistically right now. There are, many, many ways for them to get access that they probably didn't have before. So working with your IT or security group, whoever it is, reinforce messaging and perhaps communicate some of what people are seeing, just, as there's a proliferation of tools, as people are being asked to join Zoom meetings or, whatever it is, that they're aware of sort of the new and upcoming scams that we're seeing out there.
Great advice. And I'll just offer one final point, and it kind of ties back to Caitlin's earlier comment. Elicit your power users. Make them a part of the program where they can help guide and instruct and make this more comfortable for the folks that aren't as comfortable with the remote situation. That's one thing. What we've also seen internally as we've moved into this mode is kind of break it up and make sure that you could touch base with folks and check in and see how they're doing. Have a virtual cocktail hour or the online, trivia game or whatever at the end of the day. Just make sure that individuals are connected to those that may be missing just the basic elements of being in the office, so that they're not getting disconnected in what they're trying to get done. So, great suggestions in terms of the technology aspects, applying good governance, and also making sure that your training is active, is living, includes storytelling. So very good suggestions. And I think at this point, it's probably a time that we open it up. So let me hand it back to Stephanie and see if we have any questions that came in along the way, or just take those now here in the last few minutes. And thanks again to everyone from the panel.
Thank you. We do have two, I guess, comments and then one question. So Nagesh from Atos, excuse me on the pronunciation, made a comment about sharing confidential info and users on call taking screenshots of the screens being shared. So I think that was in reference to some of the points that we were sharing earlier. And we do have a question from Raul. For those that are in the financial sector, how do you manage around the clean desk policy? So I guess not sure who would like to address that question, potentially Garrett.
So I'm not quite sure what the question is, Raul, but as you think about the clean desk policy, it's really about making sure that you're protecting that sensitive personal information that you may be interacting with on a regular basis. Caitlin, I'm sure we'll have some ideas from the pure privacy perspective. From our perspective, she actually hit on some of those, and that is, we're spending time reminding folks that the rules that apply in your office apply at the home as well. That sensitive personal information needs to be protected. It needs to be put away in a place where it's not going to be accessed by people who don't have the authority or a business reason to access it. You need to be just cleaning up your workspace on a given time, as Caitlin mentioned, shutting down your laptop when you walk away from it. So it's an interesting environment. There's different situations, but the habits and the behaviors that have been instilled in our folks over the course of time need to transition with them as they work from home.
That's great. And I think I would add to that, add to what Garrett said, just two sort of issues to think through on this, or strategies. One is, to the extent that you can go paperless, right? I think that that's a best practice right now. The less paper, the less printing that you're doing, the better. And that certainly helps with clean desk policy issues. If there's no paper there, your desk is automatically quite a bit cleaner. However, the other thing to really think about, depending on your organization and your appetite for doing things like this, is I have heard recently and seen some organizations who are actually supplying their workforce with the ability to securely hold or to destroy documents from home. So that would include, you know, sponsoring as a company, providing individuals with shredders in their home, or providing them with locking filing cabinets in their home, or the ability to purchase those. That's not going to be on the table, or not going to be, you know, a possibility for every company, but I have seen some considering that. And you know, I think in certain cases that may be warranted if you do have a legitimate business case to be storing personal data, financial data, really sensitive stuff on paper in the home.
Yeah, great suggestions there. Rahul, was there anything else that you've seen on that front from some of the clients you deal with?
Actually, the opposite. I mean, with some of the clients we deal with, they were never prepared for a fully remote workforce of financial professionals to have access to these documents. I mean, I love the recommendation of going as paperless as possible, but there are still so many financial professionals that have sensitive information, PII, in documents that are on paper, and now they're somewhere in their homes. And if you're anything like me, you've probably got maybe a paper shredder, but if not, you've got paper lying everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a good point, and I think it's also something that was referenced within the guidance that FINRA produced last week, I believe, regarding activation of your BCP programs, just ensuring, again, that the changes in the work environment are reflected in the way that you're planning for work to get accomplished. And it also should be something that you consider as part of your supervisory processes, just knowing kind of where those assets might be distributed, making sure you've got a complete record of things you need to be accountable for to meet your FINRA obligations. But good question, Rahul. Thanks.
Great. So we do have just, I guess, one comment and one question from Rob over at Clark Atlanta University. So he shared that they've put out guidance on steps users should use from securing their home internet connections and how to secure their personal devices to mitigate risk. So that's great. And then the question was for the virtual cocktail hour, do you use Grubhub to send alcohol to employees' homes?
That's a great suggestion. I'm going to bring that to HR. I will.
Right.
I will advocate for that one.
BYOB.
Right.
Alcohol optional.
Right. Yeah, I will say, guys, one thing that we've been considering doing is switching from the concept of a happy hour to a coffee meetup. Just, you know, just the same way that we want to be sensitive to people's privacy in their homes. You know, we try not to put undue pressure on acting a certain way outside of work, or feeling pressure to participate in something that might not be comfortable. So we have really kind of had a push over to actual coffee meetups instead of happy hours. Actually, just one other note about that, an interesting issue that I just wanted to share with the group that came up out of one of our European offices is really around this shift on work from home and encouraging people to use video. And we put out some guidance around encouraging but not requiring people to use video, because for many employees who are working from home for the first time, they may not be comfortable showing their home setup, may not be comfortable bringing their coworkers into their personal spaces in their homes. And so we've actually put out guidance encouraging people to use video, but making sure that it's clear that it's not a requirement for folks that might not be comfortable. So I just wanted to put that out there, maybe for consideration or comment from others.
Just another note on that, which is recording. I think we didn't discuss this before. So a lot of the platforms give a visual notice that there's recording. I see one right there up in Zoom. The moderator should also tell people at the beginning of the meeting that it's going to be recorded. And if people don't want that, they can leave. But otherwise, there could be issues under notification laws. Just something to think about.
Yep, that's a great point, and that's true not only for the conferencing technology, but a lot of the collaboration tools default on with the recording, and you need to go into the settings and turn it off. So, if nothing else, just the recognition that you may have another copy of the communication that you have to be accountable for from a regulatory perspective. Great. Well, I love the virtual lunch hour thing. We've done that a couple of times, and that's good just to kind of bring back the communal feel of getting folks together for half an hour, just take a break in the middle of your day. So good, great call on that.
Lovely. Wanted to open it up to the group if there are any others that have a question or maybe even a comment that you wanted to share that maybe you didn't submit through the chat. Feel free
Well,
to.
this is Rob. If I could just piggyback a little bit on what I had mentioned, we are looking at issues from a risk mitigation perspective and identifying where the points of vulnerability are, particularly with our information technology. And while I agree with, I think it was Paul that was mentioning the idea of making sure that the company is providing a workstation. Logistically, that's not possible with our private university. And so the expectation was that individuals were going to be utilizing whatever devices they had as a first line. And then only if, when somebody was unable to demonstrate that they had a device, would the university then provide a laptop or a tablet. So that introduces all sorts of different areas of concern relative to privacy, relative to security of those devices, and what viruses or malware might be introduced from that user's computer through attachments that they might have. So we've put together guidance as to what university employees should do to make sure that their devices are secure, mandating that everyone has a antivirus program that has been provided by the university, as well as guidance that we put on individuals to make sure that their home networks are secure, because that's one of the areas of vulnerability that a lot of folks aren't thinking about. How secure is your home Wi-Fi and your password, because that could be the weak link through which somebody is able to compromise an individual user's system, implant malware, and then have connectivity through the rest of your network.
That's a great comment. And just a question back to you is, are you also including the use of mobile devices within that guidance in terms of,
Yes.
what, great. And so is that changing your policies in terms of, moving back from BYOD to a different approach, or how has it affected kind of the way that you're guiding folks on their mobile devices? I haven't seen data, but I would assume that the use of mobile is just probably through the roof over the past 3 weeks. And some of our colleagues may have data on that one, but I would imagine that's going to be location one where a lot of folks go is just, I'll send a text to somebody. That's the easiest way to get that immediate response.
Exactly. Yeah, and all of those modalities are included as a part of our policy. But that's taken it's been a huge shift for a private university where, for 150 plus years we've been operating on premises, and to now take that to remote connectivity through all of these different, whether it's cell phones, tablets, home computers, laptops, etc. And so we've really had to work very closely with our information technology staff to ensure that there are appropriate security measures in place.
Great comment. Makes a lot of sense.
Great. Any others that want to jump on or ask a question or share best practice? Okay.
Thanks, everyone.